Moonshine has been a big part of Appalachia since the very beginning. The corn the settlers grew was fairly easy to distill into whiskey, which was itself a popular and profitable product to sell. The problem was, and still is, this. Uncle Sam wants his cut of the revenue through taxes and wants to regulate its manufacture too. This the government does through revenue agents or revenuers who seek out illegal stills and moonshiners. Today we tell the story of one of the best known of these revenuers, a man called Big Six. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
Steve, I've always found the subject of moonshiners, government, illegal stills, and everything to be such a fascinating little bit of information in all about. Well, I had a great-great-grandfather that was operated a government-owned still because the government came in and told him this is what you're going to make. But, you know, people are going crazy now, and they think just because of some of the reality shows, it's real simple to do. But, hey, it's an expensive proposition if you do it the right way. But these guys, it's not that they weren't doing it the right way. They were fixing some good stuff. It was the government just wanted that tax money.
Yeah, you know, most folks talk about that, just that one side of the moonshining,
right,
the production business. Today we're going to talk about the other side. That's the folks that regulate this stuff and enforce the laws. And the fellow we're going to talk about today is probably, I guess you'd call him a legend over in Kentucky.
Wow. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. Well, for 28 years, a man named William Bernard Henderson sniffed out illegal whiskey in Kentucky. And during that time, he found and destroyed 5,000 stills and sent over 5,600 moonshiners to jail. Henderson himself bragged that he, quote, could run like a deer and nobody outran me. Now, Henderson went by the nickname Big Six. Some saying that name came from the .44 caliber pistol he carried on him, but most others say the name came from the time he played semi-pro baseball. You see, he threw a baseball just like Christy Mathewson, who was the original Big Six.
Wow. Well, Big Six Henderson was born in St. Johns, Kentucky in 1903. The great-grandson of Colonel Richard Henderson, who negotiated the Treaty of Watauga at Sycamore Shoals in what's now Elizabethton, Tennessee, purchasing lands in the Kentucky region, or as he called it, Transylvania. Not the Transylvania over in Europe, but the Transylvania as it was called here in the United States before the colonies and so forth. Big Six was sent to a boarding school in Indiana in 1909, where he attended both elementary and high school. He graduated from Jasper College in Indiana in 1923 and then went to law school at the University of Louisville.
Yeah, we say Louisville because on one of the YouTube videos that we talked about Louisville, I pronounced it Louisville, and I was kindly corrected on that.
Were you now?
Yes, I was, and very nicely.
Is that like Staunton? You know, some people back here has always called it Staunton, and then I was corrected one time. No, I'm sorry, that's Stanton. So, yeah, you had that spirit of that deep voice kind of talking to you right there of Louisville.
Indeed. Okay. Well, it was while he was in college that Big Six played semi-pro baseball and got that Big Six nickname. In law school, he also played basketball, football, tennis, bowling, and golf. After law school, he went to work for the L&N Railroad. In 1941, Henderson became a Treasury investigator in the Department of Alcohol Tax Unit, which, Rod, is a fancy way of saying he'd become a revenue agent. Well, this job he held until the 1970s, becoming very well known to moonshiners and rum runners throughout the state of Kentucky. Now, much of his time was spent in Cumberland County, midway between Knoxville and Nashville in Kentucky. And one place in Cumberland County Big Six worked was a place called Coe Ridge, where a mixed group of former slaves and Native Americans had settled after the Civil War. Coe Ridge had one main profession, making moonshine. Henderson's first raid on Coe Ridge was on March 12, 1942, when he captured 7 moonshine stills and destroyed 300 gallons of whiskey. Now, over the next 24 years, Big Six caught and prosecuted most every moonshiner that operated in that area. In Cumberland County alone, he was responsible for finding a total of 304 stills during his career, more than any other county in Kentucky in 25 years.
Well, Big Six himself shared many stories about his time busting moonshiners. In one instance, he and his men came up on an operation run by a well-known moonshiner named Fuzzy Anders. Williams and I were going to divide up and come down the ridge on them and slip up and catch them. Here comes these three boys down to the still. They were about 20-year-old youngsters and making a lot of noise. Well, we'd been up there for about 20 or 30 minutes when we looked up, and here came this old boy with a white beard about 2 or 3 inches long. He had a cane, taking his time coming down from the ridge. He spent 15 or 20 minutes working his way down. Well, we started about halfway down there, and this old boy looked up and saw us. And he let out a yell, and then he dropped that crutch, and he took off. We caught the other three. He's the only one that got away from us. Yeah, that was old Fuzzy. We picked him up a short time later.
Bless old Fuzzy. Well, another story involved a moonshiner named Joe Coe, who was arrested by Big Six and brought before a judge. When the judge asked him what kind of record he had, he replied that it was a perfect record. The judge asked him what he meant by perfect record, and he replied that, well, he'd been arrested 8 times and sent to the penitentiary 8 times. Perfect.
Yes, perfect.
Well, Big Six was so persistent in his raiding of local stills, one group of moonshiners even developed an early warning system. Whenever one still operator spotted an officer, he'd throw back his head and yell at the top of his lungs, "Fire in the hole!" This yell was then repeated from ridgetop to ridgetop throughout the area until the last moonshiner knew that the law was coming and it was time to get gone. Well, Rod, this system worked for a while, until Big Six arranged for police cars to arrive simultaneously at the homes of every known moonshiner in the area at the same time. So the only successful yell was the first one. On that occasion, Big Six nabbed 7 prisoners, 3 of whom were sent to prison, and 4 who were put on probation on the condition that they leave Kentucky, never to return.
Well, Steve, it was said that Big Six could creep through the Appalachian woods as quiet as smoke and run like a deer for miles. Often the men he was chasing didn't even run. One day he was after a moonshiner and yelled, "Homer, halt!" Homer froze in his tracks and replied, "I'm halted, Big Six." He also shared other stories not involving his days as a revenuer. He claimed to have met Babe Ruth and developed a friendship with him. He was in the stands the day that Ruth called a home run. You kind of remember that one. You know, he pointed supposedly where he was going to hit it at and stuff. Then he went on to hit it. And he had box seats in the 1932 World Series courtesy of the Bambino, in which the Yankees swept the Cubs, the poor Cubs at that time, 4-0.
Well, in April 1970, Big Six was appointed as U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Kentucky, stationed in Louisville. During this time, he moved up from busting individual stills to working criminal cases against bigger and more powerful men. In 1975, he retired from the Marshal Service over the imminent federal involvement in forced busing in Louisville, something in which he didn't want to be involved. He passed away in July 1987 at the age of 83.
Wow. I love stories like this. Love to hear these stories. Reminded me of a story that was once told to me by one of my wife's relatives, and that was the red onion. And when they knew revenuers were coming, they got at least a hint from somebody down the road or whatever it may have been, and they immediately started taking all of the liquor, pouring it down the sink, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're wasting all that great liquor. Well, they had an intricate plumbing system that ran down into the basement where all of the liquor went down and then went into a barrel. And then when they came up there, the revenuers looking around, they said, we don't have anything like that. They said, well, we know you got rid of it. Well, after they had left and went on, they took the barrel, brought it back up, started feeding it back out again in the bottles, and it was a stuff of what legends, I guess, were made of. It's just that ingenuity, I guess you could say, of, Appalachian people when it came to moonshining and among other different things. But hey, he sounds like a character too. I love that one of Homer, halt. I'm halted, Big Six. I like that. That's a good one. And the other one about the guy suddenly dropping that crutch and running. That's the one that got me too.
Well, old Big Six he was a legend, all right. And to be honest, a lot of this legend was spread by him. He would go around and tell most of these stories. In fact, I came across I think it was some kind of a thesis for a PhD maybe, or a MA or something, in which it's all about this. That's where I got some of the facts on this. And he told a lot of these stories. Nobody else really seemed to want to tell a bunch of these stories on him because, well, I guess they would figure they would get blamed for being a moonshiner and somebody come arrest him. But this guy just told story after story after story after story of his adventures.
Yeah. I know there were a lot of, moonshine revenuers back in those days, and they traveled all over the hills of Kentucky, Virginia. Gosh, what was the most prominent one in the state of Virginia? Franklin County. They could shut Franklin County down. Of course, the sheriff's department, I think at the time, they were kind of bought off out of the whole thing. And then it comes back to, of all things, Dickinson County, and it reminds me of Pridemore Fleming. When Pridemore was going and they were having the stills and they were raiding the stills and so forth, and yet he was drinking all the profits. That's what he was doing, drinking them or passing them out to somebody else and making money on them. So, it was a wild business back in those days.
And folks, that's the story of legendary federal revenuer William Big Six Henderson. Another bit of the history of this place we call home. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.